There is a kind of person who wakes up every morning already losing. The alarm goes off, and before their feet even touch the floor, the mind has already started running, anxiety about the day ahead, replaying yesterday's failures, worrying about money, relationships, status, things they cannot control and things they refuse to confront. They reach for their phone before they reach for their thoughts. They scroll before they stand. And by the time they walk out the door, they have already handed their mind over to the chaos of the world without ever once choosing what kind of person they intend to be that day. They are reactive before they are ever intentional. And the tragedy is, most of them do not even realize it is happening. You might be that person. You might have been that person for years. And the reason it keeps happening is not because you lack ambition. It is not because you do not want better for yourself. It is because no one ever gave you a system. No one ever sat you down and said, "Here is how a disciplined mind is actually built. Here is how you take the raw, scattered, overwhelmed version of yourself and forge it, morning by morning, into something unshakable. Something that does not crumble when pressure arrives. Something that does not quit when the work gets hard." The ancient Stoics had that system. They built it over 500 years of philosophy, war, exile, slavery, political collapse, and personal catastrophe. Marcus Aurelius used it to run an empire while fighting off plague and invasion. Epictetus used it to survive slavery and emerge with a mind freer than any of his masters. Seneca used it to face death with a composure that stunned the soldiers sent to execute him. These were not sheltered men writing comfortable thoughts in quiet libraries. These were people under unimaginable pressure, and the morning discipline they practiced was the reason they did not break. What you are about to hear is not motivational content. It is not a list of feel-good quotes dressed up as philosophy. What you are about to hear is a step-by-step reconstruction of the actual morning discipline the Stoics practiced, translated into the language of the life you are living right now, in the world as it exists today. 10 rules. 10 shifts in how you think, how you start, and how you build a mind that cannot be easily shaken. Each one rooted in Stoic texts. Each one tested by people who had far more to lose than most of us ever will. If you are new here, welcome. This channel exists for one reason: to take ancient wisdom and make it useful for real people living real lives. If what you hear today changes something in you, subscribe to this channel right now. There are thousands of people building this discipline alongside you, and every week we go deeper. Hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. It could change everything. Now, let us begin. Rule 1: Wake before the world decides who you are. Marcus Aurelius did not begin his mornings the way most people imagine an emperor would. He did not lie in silk sheets waiting for servants to bring him the news of the empire. He woke in the dark, often before dawn, and before a single servant spoke to him, before a single general brought a report, before any decision of state was demanded of him. He sat with his own thoughts and deliberately chose who he was going to be. We know this because he wrote it down. Not for publication, not for posterity, but for himself, private notes, a personal journal that he never intended for anyone else to read. What we call meditations. Today was his morning and evening discipline, raw and unpolished and deeply honest in a way that polished public writing never is. The first Stoic rule for disciplining your mind every morning is deceptively simple: wake before the world decides who you are. What does that mean in practice? It means that in the first moments of your day, before you open an app, before you answer a message, before you expose your mind to the noise of other people's agendas, you claim your mind as your own. You establish ownership of your thoughts before the world starts making deposits into your head without your consent. Most people violate this rule the instant the alarm sounds. The phone is in hand within 30 seconds. Social media, news, messages, all of it rushing in like a flood into a room that has no door yet, because the mind has not had a single quiet moment to build one. And what happens when you fill a room before you furnish it? Everything is chaos. The chaos of other people's lives, other people's emergencies, other people's opinions. It all lands in your mind before you have had a single moment to decide what belongs there, and what does not. And for the rest of the day, you are not running your own mind. You are curating a reaction to everyone else's. The Stoics understood something about this that modern psychology has only recently begun to confirm. The first conscious moments of your morning are cognitively and emotionally decisive in a way that no other window of time is. Your mind is freshly emerged from sleep. It is not yet defended, not yet armored, not yet rational in the full sense. It is open, porous, and unusually susceptible to whatever it encounters first. The ancient Stoics called this the morning threshold, a liminal space between the unconscious and the fully engaged rational mind, and they treated it as sacred territory. Not because of any mystical belief, but because of clear-headed practical observation. What enters the mind first tends to shape the emotional and cognitive architecture of the entire day. Epictetus, speaking to his students in Nicopolis, made this point with characteristic bluntness. He asked them what the first thing they thought about each morning was. And when they gave the expected answers, duty, philosophy, their obligations, he pressed them. He asked whether those thoughts arose naturally and with conviction, or whether they arrived only after the mind had already been muddied by appetite, habit, and distraction. His point was not that the thought matters less than its timing. His point was that a thought chosen in a clear, undisturbed mind is a completely different thing from the same thought chosen in a mind already reactive, already anxious, already defensive. The content may be the same. The quality of the intention is entirely different. This is why the rule is not simply, wake up early. Waking up early means nothing if you use that extra time to consume more content, to fill more silence with noise, to simply start the chaos earlier. The rule is to wake before the world decides who you are. To rise, and in the first quiet moments of consciousness, to be deliberately and purposefully yourself, before you are anyone's customer, anyone's audience, anyone's employee, anyone's problem, anyone's distraction. To simply be, briefly and honestly, the person you are trying to become, before the world gets its hands on you for the day. Marcus wrote in his Meditations, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This sounds harsh. It sounds almost like cynicism. But read it again. He was not saying this to breed resentment, or start his day in bitterness. He was doing something entirely different. He was forecasting the day. He was saying, I know what is coming. I have thought about it clearly, in a quiet mind, before any of it actually arrived. And because I have thought about it clearly, when it does arrive, it will not shock me, destabilize me, or make me react in ways I will later regret. The morning practice was a form of armor. Not armor that hardens the heart, but armor that steadies the mind. Try this tomorrow. Before your phone. Before your email. Before anyone else speaks a single word into your life, give yourself 10 minutes of deliberately claimed silence. Sit with your own thoughts. Let them come without agenda. Notice what arrives first, what your mind gravitates toward when there is no external pull. You may find it goes immediately to worry. You may find it goes to regret, or ambition, or hunger, or grief. Let it go where it goes. But stay with it. Stay with your own mind without reaching for a distraction, without managing the discomfort with a screen. Just be inside your own thoughts for 10 uninterrupted minutes, and see what you find there. Because the Stoics believed, with absolute conviction, that a person who cannot be alone with their own mind in the morning will spend the rest of the day at the mercy of everyone else's. The morning is not merely the beginning of a schedule. It is the beginning of a self. Every morning you are, in a meaningful sense, choosing what kind of person you will be for the next 16 hours. The question the Stoics asked was not, what will I do today? It was, who will I be today? And that question, that foundational, identity-level question, deserves to be asked in a mind that is clear, quiet, and fully your own. Not a mind already buzzing with notifications. Not a mind already tethered to someone else's urgency. Your mind. Your question. Your choice. Before the world gets a single vote. The discipline that starts here does not end here. It accumulates. One morning of claimed silence becomes a week. A week becomes a month. And inside that month something begins to shift, not dramatically, Not in any way that makes for an exciting social media post, but genuinely and structurally. The mind begins to know itself better. It begins to trust itself. And a mind that trusts itself does not require constant validation from the outside world, does not need the dopamine hit of a liked post to feel real, does not collapse at the first sign of difficulty. A self-knowing mind is the beginning of everything the Stoics were trying to build. And it starts, always, consistently, without exception, at the moment you choose to wake before the world decides who you are. Do not underestimate the power of that moment. It is small. It is quiet. It is invisible to everyone around you. But inside it is an entire philosophy of freedom. The Stoics were not free because they had power or money or high positions. Marcus Aurelius had all of those things and still treated the morning as sacred territory. Epictetus had none of those things. He was a slave, and still began each day by claiming the one thing no one could take from him, the quality of his own mind. That is the rule. That is the foundation. Wake before the world decides who you are. Claim your mind first. Everything else is built on that. Rule 2: rehearse the worst before it arrives. Here is a thought that will feel uncomfortable the first time you really sit with it. The things you are most afraid of losing are also the things that, if you lost them without warning, would devastate you most completely. Your health. Your relationships. Your livelihood. Your sense of who you are in the world. You carry these things with you every day as if they are permanent, as if their continued presence in your life is guaranteed, as if the universe has made you a promise it has every intention of keeping. And then one day, because the universe keeps no such promises, one of them is taken. Suddenly, without warning, without your consent. And the pain is not just the loss itself. The pain is the shock. The disorientation. The feeling that the ground beneath you was never as solid as it appeared, and you had no idea. The Stoics had a practice for this. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. It sounds dark. It is, in a sense, deliberately dark. But its purpose is one of the most psychologically sophisticated things the ancient world ever produced. The practice works like this: in the morning, before your day begins, you deliberately imagine losing something or someone you care about. Not in a morbid, self-destructive way. Not in a way that induces anxiety or despair. But in a clear, honest, meditative way, you hold the possibility of loss in your mind, look at it directly, sit with the discomfort it produces, and then continue with your day. You do this not to torture yourself, but to inoculate yourself. To diminish the shock. To build a kind of psychological resilience that cannot be built any other way. Seneca wrote about this with an almost clinical clarity. He described how a general who has never considered the possibility of defeat is far more dangerous to his own army than a general who has. The one who has never considered defeat does not have a contingency. He has no plan for retreat, no protocol for loss. And when defeat comes, and it always comes eventually, he collapses in ways that take his entire army down with him. The general who has held the possibility of defeat in mind, who has rehearsed it, who has thought through what he would do and who he would still be on the other side of it, that general bends, adjusts, retreats when necessary, and survives to fight again. The mental rehearsal of loss is not pessimism. It is the most serious form of preparation. Consider what this looks like in the morning practice. You sit quietly. You think of something that matters deeply to you. Perhaps it is your partner, your child, your career, your home, your health. And you allow yourself to genuinely imagine its absence. Not catastrophize. Not spiral. Simply hold the thought: this could be gone. Tomorrow. Next week. Next year. It happens to people every day. It has happened to people I know. It will happen to me eventually, in some form or another. I do not know when. I do not know which thing I will lose first or how it will feel. But I know that loss is not an interruption to life. It is woven into it, inseparable from it, as essential a part of the human story as birth and breath and joy. Now, what happens in the mind when you do this honestly? Something remarkable. The imagined loss, instead of producing paralysis or despair, produces gratitude. Because the moment you genuinely, meditatively hold the possibility of losing something, you stop taking it for granted. The partner you have been mildly annoyed with for the last 3 days becomes, in the light of this practice, an extraordinary gift whose presence you have been treating as background noise. The job you have been complaining about becomes a structure that has been keeping your life functional in ways you have not fully appreciated. The body you have been criticizing in the mirror becomes an instrument of staggering capability and durability that carries you through every day of your life without a word of thanks. This is not a trick of thought. This is not positive thinking dressed in dark clothing. This is an honest confrontation with reality. Things end. People leave. Bodies fail. Circumstances shift. The Stoics were not pessimists about this, they were realists. And their realism led them, paradoxically, to a kind of joy that optimists rarely achieve. Because optimism depends on things going well to survive. Stoic gratitude does not. It is generated not by circumstances being favorable, but by the honest recognition that circumstances could be, have been, and will eventually be far worse, and that right now, in this moment, much of what you have is extraordinary. Marcus Aurelius practiced this with an almost ruthless consistency. He wrote about imagining the deaths of people he loved, not as indulgence of morbid fantasy, but as a deliberate act of emotional preparation and present moment appreciation. He wrote about imagining the loss of his power, his health, his reputation. Not because he believed catastrophe was inevitable in the short term, but because he believed that a mind that can hold loss without flinching is a stronger, freer, more grateful mind than one that cannot. And a stronger mind, he believed, was the only real protection a person could carry through a world as unpredictable as the one he inhabited. The modern world has made this practice feel counterintuitive. We are sold, everywhere and constantly, the message that happiness consists in accumulating and protecting positive experiences, that the goal of a well-lived day is to feel good, to stay comfortable, to avoid anxiety, to suppress anything that might produce discomfort. And so we have built lives of extraordinary surface comfort that leave us psychologically brittle underneath. We have insulated ourselves so thoroughly from the experience of difficulty that we have also insulated ourselves from the resilience that difficulty builds. And when something goes wrong, as it always does, we do not have the internal architecture to handle it. Premeditatio malorum is the antidote. Not because imagining bad things makes you tough in some crude, emotionally suppressed way, but because looking directly at the possibility of loss, in a controlled and meditative space, builds a relationship with uncertainty that is honest rather than avoidant. You are not surprised by loss. You are not destroyed by it. You do not require perfect circumstances to find meaning. You have already rehearsed standing in the rubble and choosing, from that position, who you will still be. And that rehearsal, done quietly, every morning before the day begins, is what allows you to be genuinely present for the life you actually have. In practical terms, this practice takes less than 5 minutes. You sit in the morning stillness. You choose one thing, just one, that matters to you. You hold its absence in your mind. You let yourself feel what that absence would mean. You do not rush past the discomfort. You sit in it briefly, respectfully, honestly. And then you open your eyes, look at your life as it actually is, and feel, perhaps for the first time in days or weeks, how much of it is worth your full and undivided attention. That feeling is not manufactured. It is real. It is what the Stoics were after. Not the suppression of feeling, but the elevation of it, from dull, habitual comfort to genuine, clear-eyed gratitude for a life that is temporary, impermanent, and therefore, beautiful. This is the second rule. Rehearse the worst before it arrives. Not so you live in fear. Not so you spend your mornings in grief. But so you spend your days truly awake to what you have, and genuinely prepared for what may one day change. A mind that has done this practice is not brittle. It does not shatter at the first contact with difficulty. It bends. It adjusts. It continues. And that continuity, that capacity to absorb loss without being destroyed by it, is one of the most important things a human being can build inside themselves. The Stoics built it every morning. So can you. Rule 3. Draw the line between what is yours and what is not. There is a question the Stoics asked every single morning that most people today never ask even once in their entire lives. It is a short question. It sounds almost too simple to be meaningful. But it is arguably the most psychologically powerful question ever formulated by any philosophical tradition in any culture in all of recorded human history. The question is this within my control? 4 words. 4 words that, properly understood and consistently applied, will dismantle most of the anxiety, resentment, frustration, and exhausted helplessness that define the inner lives of the majority of people walking around today. Because here is the thing that nobody tells you when you spend your energy worrying about other people's opinions, other people's decisions, the economy, the weather, what happened yesterday, what might happen tomorrow, whether someone likes you, whether you come across well, whether the outcome of a project you worked hard on will be what you hoped. None of that is within your control. None of it. And every calorie of mental and emotional energy you pour into trying to control it is not just wasted. It is actively damaging. It depletes you. It leaves you exhausted and hollow and no closer to the thing you were trying to control. Epictetus called this the dichotomy of control, and he made it the absolute foundation of his entire philosophy. He was uncompromising about it in a way that made his students uncomfortable, and continues to make readers uncomfortable today. He said, some things are in our power and some are not. In our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not in our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. This is the fundamental division. Everything that exists in your life, every circumstance you face, every experience you have, it falls on one side of that line or the other. Either it is yours to control, or it is not. There is no middle ground. There is no negotiation. Now here is where most people misapply this. They hear, focus only on what you can control, and they translate it into passivity, into a kind of resigned acceptance of everything. They think it means, do not try hard, do not care about outcomes, do not set goals, just let the world happen to you and shrug. This is a complete and total misreading of Stoic philosophy, and Epictetus would have had strong words for anyone who arrived at that interpretation. What the dichotomy of control actually demands is something far more difficult than passivity. It demands that you bring your full, uncompromising, maximum effort to every single thing that is within your control, and that you release, fully and genuinely, every single thing that is not. What is within your control? Your effort. Your attention. Your attitude. Your preparation. The words you choose to say and the way you choose to say them. The habits you build and the ones you discard. The thoughts you entertain and the ones you dismiss. The principles you act from and the values you defend. These are yours. Completely, unconditionally yours. No one can take them from you. No circumstance can override them. Even in the most extreme conditions, Epictetus was a slave, remember, owned by another human being, with no legal rights, no freedom of movement, no control over almost any external aspect of his life. Even then, these things remained his. The quality of his mind, the integrity of his character, the direction of his will. Those were never touched by the chains on his wrists. What is not within your control? Almost everything else. The outcome of your efforts. You can work brilliantly and still fail. The opinions others hold of you. You can behave impeccably and still be misunderstood, criticized, resented. The behavior of other people. You can be the most loving parent, partner, friend, colleague in the world and still watch people you care about make choices that hurt them and hurt you. The economy. The weather. Your health, to a significant degree. The circumstances of your birth. The way the market responds to your work. The way a conversation lands. None of it, in the final analysis, is yours to control. You can influence some of it. You cannot control any of it. So what does this look like as a morning practice? Before you begin your day, you take a few minutes to think through what is ahead. You think about the meetings, the interactions, the projects, the challenges, the uncertainties. And for each one, you ask the question, is this within my control? If the answer is yes, it is a decision you need to make, a skill you need to apply, an effort you need to give, a word you need to choose. You bring your full presence and attention to it. You do not half-heartedly engage. You go all in. Because it is yours. It is one of the rare things that is actually, genuinely, fully yours. And you honor that by giving it everything. If the answer is no, it is someone else's decision, it is an outcome you cannot determine, it is a variable you cannot set, then you practice what the Stoics called the art of release. This is harder than it sounds. The Stoics were not under any illusion that it was easy to stop caring about things you cannot control. They knew it was one of the most demanding disciplines a human being could attempt. Seneca wrote extensively about how the mind grabs onto uncontrollable things with a grip that reasoning alone cannot easily break. But with consistent practice, with the daily habit of asking the question and honestly categorizing the answer, the grip loosens. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. What begins to happen, and this is the extraordinary thing, is that your relationship with anxiety changes. Not because your circumstances become less uncertain. Not because the uncontrollable things stop being uncontrollable. But because you stop spending your energy fighting the architecture of reality. You stop pouring yourself into a battle you cannot win, against forces that are simply beyond the reach of your will. And when you stop doing that, the energy that was being consumed in that futile fight becomes available for the things that are actually yours. Your efforts become cleaner, sharper, more effective. Your mind becomes less cluttered, less exhausted, less reactive. You start to feel, for perhaps the first time in a long time, as though you are doing something real with your life, rather than simply managing the anxiety produced by all the things you cannot control. Marcus Aurelius returned to this principle again and again in his meditations. Not because he had mastered it and found it easy, the very fact that he kept returning to it tells you he found it difficult. He kept reconfronting the line between what was his and what was not. He kept re-examining his reactions, his anxieties, his frustrations, and asking himself, is this thing I am concerned about actually mine to control? And when the honest answer was no, and for an emperor, governing millions of people through plague and war and political betrayal, the honest answer was often no, he practiced release. He redirected his energy toward his own virtue, his own effort, his own character. Those were always his. Those he could always work on. And those, he came to believe, were the only things worth spending himself on. This is the third rule. Draw the line every morning between what is yours and what is not. Bring everything you have to what falls on your side of the line. Let go, really let go, not performatively but genuinely, of what falls on the other side. This practice will not make your life easier in the sense of removing difficulty. It will make you stronger in the sense of stopping the self-inflicted suffering of trying to control what was never yours to begin with. And that is a different kind of freedom, quieter, less dramatic, and far more durable than anything the world's approval or circumstances could ever provide. Rule 4. Guard the gate of your attention. Every morning you wake up, there is a war being fought for your attention. You may not feel it as a war. It does not feel like a battlefield. It feels like notifications, like a news feed, like a text from someone, like an interesting video, like one more piece of content in an endless stream that promises to inform you, entertain you, connect you, outrage you, inspire you. It feels harmless. It feels optional. It feels like something you could stop anytime you chose to. But here is the thing the Stoics understood, and that modern behavioral science has confirmed with uncomfortable precision. The feeling that you could stop anytime you chose is itself part of the design. And every piece of your attention that gets claimed by something outside yourself is a piece that is no longer available for the life you are actually trying to build. Attention is not a resource. That framing, common in productivity culture, makes it sound like something you manage, allocate, and optimize. The Stoics had a more radical view. They believed attention was, in a fundamental sense, you. Not something you possess or deploy. Something you are. What you give your attention to is what you become. What you consistently direct your mind towards shapes the structure of your character, the quality of your perceptions, the depth of your understanding, and the direction of your life. This was not metaphor for the Stoics. It was philosophy taken with complete seriousness. You are, at every moment, the sum of what you have chosen to attend to. And the morning, that first critical window when the mind is freshest and most impressionable, is where the most consequential attention decisions of your day are made. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The first thing to do, don't get excited. The second, listen to reason." What he was describing, in his compressed and direct way, was exactly this. Before your attention gets captured by the emotional turbulence of the world, before you let stimulation override reflection, pause. Listen. Not to the noise outside, to the reason inside. Let your own mind have the first word. Let your own judgment, your own values, your own established sense of what matters, let those be the first things that address you in the morning, before the world crowds in with its competing agenda. The practical Stoic teaching here is about what they called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, or what we might today call the executive mind. The Stoics believed that the ruling faculty could be trained, like a muscle, to remain sovereign over the impressions and sensations that bombarded it. Every experience that enters your awareness, every piece of news, every social interaction, every stimulus, arrives as what the Stoics called a fantasia, an impression. And the ruling faculty has the power to evaluate that impression, to decide whether it is accurate, whether it deserves a reaction, whether the reaction it seems to demand is actually warranted. This power, the power of evaluation before reaction, is what separates a disciplined mind from a reactive one. But that power is not automatic. It has to be exercised. And it has to be exercised consistently, especially in the morning, before the impressions start arriving in volume. A ruling faculty that has been lazily surrendering its authority to every incoming stimulus, every notification, every outrage, every piece of manufactured urgency, becomes progressively weaker, less capable of the kind of evaluative pause that Stoic discipline requires. And a ruling faculty that has been consistently, deliberately exercised, that every morning takes a few moments to assert its authority, to remind itself of its values, to choose what deserves its attention and what does not, becomes stronger, clearer, and more capable of exactly the kind of sovereign, rational response that the Stoics considered the hallmark of a well-lived life. What does this look like as a morning practice? It looks like choosing, deliberately and with intention, what receives your attention first. Not what is most immediately stimulating. Not what creates the most urgent feeling. Not what the algorithm has decided is most likely to provoke a response from you. But what you, as a reasoning, value-driven human being, have decided is worthy of your most precious cognitive resource on a given morning. For some people this means reading from a text of substance, philosophy, history, something that requires real engagement. For some it means writing, journaling, reflecting, articulating the thoughts that have been accumulating in the back of the mind. For some it means sitting in deliberate silence, training the mind to be comfortable in stillness rather than constantly reaching for stimulation. Epictetus addressed this with characteristic directness. He told his students that if they were serious about philosophy, and by philosophy he meant the practice of living well, they would have to make serious decisions about what they allowed into their minds. He was not gentle about it. He said, "Be careful whom you associate with. Be careful what you read. Be careful what conversations you allow yourself to be drawn into. Because everything that enters your mind leaves a trace. Every piece of content you consume, every argument you engage with, every emotional tone you expose yourself to, it shapes the internal landscape that your thoughts must then navigate. You cannot control everything that tries to enter. But you can control your gates." The gate metaphor is particularly useful here. Think of your attention as a walled city, and think of the morning as the moment when the gates are being opened for the day. You have a choice, every morning, about what you let through first. The city can receive trade, useful information, meaningful connection, genuine learning, or it can receive an invading army of noise, manipulation, manufactured outrage, and addictive stimulation that leaves it pillaged by noon. The Stoics were gatekeepers. They were not hermits. They were not trying to avoid the world. They were trying to ensure that when the world arrived, they were ready for it, alert, considered, sovereign in their own minds, rather than already overwhelmed before they had even begun. There is a version of this that most people dismiss as impractical. They say, I have to check my phone in the morning, I have messages that need responses, I have work emails, I cannot just sit in silence for an hour before I engage with the world. And this is fair. Very few people live lives that allow for extended morning silence without consequences. But the practice does not require an hour. It does not require dramatic lifestyle restructuring. It requires only a commitment to being deliberate, to choosing what gets your attention first, even if only for 10 minutes, even if the choice is simply to sit with your coffee and your own thoughts before the phone comes out. The length of the practice matters far less than the quality of the intention behind it. A deliberate 10 minutes is worth more than a distracted hour. The fourth Stoic rule for disciplining your mind every morning is to guard the gate of your attention. To treat your attention as the precious and irreplaceable resource it actually is. To decide before anyone else does what deserves the first and best of your cognitive engagement each day. This is not selfishness. It is not retreat from responsibility. It is the foundational act that makes every other act of your day more considered, more effective, and more genuinely your own. A mind that controls its own attention is a mind that controls itself. And a mind that controls itself is, in the Stoic understanding, the only kind of mind that is truly free. Rule 5. Act once, without hesitation and without excuse. The Stoics had very little patience for the internal theater of perpetual deliberation. They understood that the mind, left to its own devices, will generate an endless supply of reasons to wait, to gather more information, to consider more options, to prepare more thoroughly, to wait for a better moment, a clearer sign, a more favorable set of circumstances. And they understood, with equally clear eyes, that this theater of deliberation is almost never actually about preparation. It is almost always about fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of committing to something and being wrong, fear of giving your full effort and still coming up short. The infinite deliberation is the mind's elaborate, and often very convincing way of protecting itself from the exposure that action requires. Marcus Aurelius wrote what may be the most practically powerful single line in all of Stoic literature. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But the line that sits alongside it in his meditations, the one that is quoted less often and is perhaps more challenging, is this. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not deliberate. Not prepare to be one. Not think carefully about what that means and develop a comprehensive plan. Be one. Now. With what you have. In the conditions that currently exist. Without waiting for permission or perfect circumstances. The fifth Stoic morning rule is about action, specifically about the Stoic understanding that the gap between knowing and doing is not an intellectual problem. It is a character problem. And it is a problem that can only be solved by repeatedly, consistently, on purpose closing that gap in the direction of action rather than deliberation. Every morning you wake up with intentions. Things you mean to do, things you know you should do, things you have been meaning to get around to. And every morning, the mind begins its negotiation, not yet, after breakfast, once I feel more awake, once the timing is better, once I have thought through it a bit more. The Stoics called this failure of nerve. Not weakness of intelligence. Failure of nerve. And they addressed it as a moral failing, not just a productivity problem. Epictetus was particularly direct on this point. He told his students that there was precisely one thing they needed to do with the philosophical truths they learned: practice them. Now. In the immediate and actual circumstances of their lives. Not in theory, not in prepared scenarios, not in the abstract. He said the person who learns philosophy but does not practice it is like a person who reads about wrestling techniques but never steps on the mat. The reading leaves no useful residue. It is the mat, the actual contact with real resistance, that builds the wrestler. And it is the action, the actual attempt to embody the value in real circumstances with real stakes, that builds the character. In a morning practice, this translates into a very specific discipline. When you rise, you identify one thing, just one, that you have been avoiding. One conversation you have been putting off. One task you have been circling without landing. One habit you have been intending to start. One thing you know needs to be done, and that you have been skillfully finding reasons to defer. And then, before the negotiation begins, before the mind spins up its very reasonable-sounding list of why today is still not quite the right moment, you begin. Not perfectly. Not with full preparation. Not with every concern resolved and every risk eliminated. You begin with what you have, as you are, in the circumstances that actually exist. This is not recklessness. The Stoics were not advocating for impulsive, unthought action. They were advocates of the examined life, of careful deliberation, of reason applied rigorously to every decision of consequence. What they were opposing was not deliberation itself but its corruption, the mutation of reasonable consideration into permanent, self-protective delay. There is a difference between taking time to think clearly about a complex decision and spending 3 years, preparing, to start a business that you are actually just too afraid to begin. There is a difference between careful communication and never having the difficult conversation because the timing is never quite right. Honest self-examination, which the Stoics demanded above almost everything else, will tell you which side of that line you are on. The mind knows the difference. It is just not always honest about it. Seneca addressed this in some of his most direct letters. He wrote to his friend Lucilius with an almost tender urgency about the wasting of time, not through laziness or hedonism, but through exactly this respectable-seeming form of perpetual delay. He said, "Begin at once to live, and count each separate day as a separate life. Each day is complete. Each day demands your full engagement. Not tomorrow's version of you, with tomorrow's preparation and tomorrow's resolve. Today's version. With what exists right now. The action does not have to be large. It does not have to be perfect. It has to be real. A real step, taken in the real world, from the real person you actually are right now, is worth more, Seneca argued, than any amount of imagined future action taken by the improved version of you that you are using as an excuse not to begin. The morning discipline of action is, in practice, about building a relationship between intention and execution that is as short as possible. The longer the gap between deciding to do something and actually doing it, the more time the fear and the negotiation and the doubt have to occupy that gap and expand it into permanence. The Stoics wanted the gap eliminated, not recklessly, but decisively. The person of character does not think about acting rightly, and then build up to it. They act rightly, now, in this moment, and let the action speak for the character rather than waiting for some imagined future purity that will never arrive because the action that would produce it keeps being deferred. Wake up. Identify the thing you have been avoiding. Begin it today. Not because you feel ready. Not because the timing is perfect. Not because every concern has been resolved. Begin it because today is what exists, and because the person you are trying to become is built from actions taken by the person you currently are. There is no other material. There is no other construction. There is no other moment but this one, and the Stoics, with their clear eyes and their hard-won wisdom, knew it better than anyone. Rule 6. Welcome difficulty as the only real teacher. Here is something no one particularly wants to hear, but that the Stoics stated plainly, and without apology. Comfort does not build character. It never has, it never will. And every civilization that has tried to arrange its life primarily around the elimination of difficulty has produced, within a generation or two, exactly the kind of soft, anxious, directionless person that its architects hope to eliminate. Not because difficulty is virtuous for its own sake. Not because suffering is ennobling in some romantic sense. But because the specific capacities that make a human life genuinely good, resilience, patience, perspective, the ability to endure uncertainty without collapsing, those capacities are quite literally impossible to develop in the absence of the conditions that require them. The Stoics understood this at a cellular level. They did not merely accept difficulty. They sought it. Not masochistically, not in the spirit of self-punishment, but with the clear recognition that the resistance is the teacher. Seneca put it this way: fire is the test of gold, adversity of strong men. And the inverse, the thing he left unstated but implied, is that gold untested by fire is soft, unreliable, and likely to fail precisely when it matters most. A person untested by adversity is the same. They may look fine in comfortable conditions. They may even appear confident and capable when nothing is going wrong. But the first significant friction reveals what they are actually made of. And if they have never built the muscle, because the muscle only gets built under load, they discover in that moment that they are less than they thought. The morning practice of welcoming difficulty begins with a deliberate reframing that must happen before the day's challenges arrive. Because if you wait until difficulty appears to decide how you will relate to it, you will almost certainly relate to it as an enemy, as an interruption, as something that should not be happening to you, something that the universe has imposed unfairly, something to be resolved as quickly as possible so you can return to the comfortable baseline you were trying to maintain. That framing, difficulty as enemy, comfort as the natural and rightful state of things, is the framing that makes hardship genuinely damaging. Not the hardship itself. The framing. The Stoic reframe is this: difficulty is not an interruption to your development. It is the mechanism of your development. Every challenging conversation, every frustrating setback, every plan that falls apart, every relationship that requires more than you thought you had, every day when the energy is low and the demands are high, all of it is curriculum. Not punishment. Curriculum. The universe is not testing you in the adversarial sense of hoping you will fail. It is simply being what it has always been: unpredictable, indifferent, relentlessly resistant to human preference. And in that resistance, if you approach it correctly, is everything you need to become stronger than you currently are. Marcus Aurelius faced this practice in conditions that would break most people. He governed through the Antonine Plague, which killed millions. He fought wars on multiple frontiers simultaneously. He dealt with betrayals from people he trusted, incompetence in those he relied on, and the relentless political complexity of managing an empire of millions with no modern communication, no bureaucratic infrastructure, and no guarantee that anything he built would survive him. And every morning, in the pages of what became his meditations, he practiced the reframe. He told himself, "This is what the day brings. This difficulty, this person, this challenge. I have what I need to meet it. The meeting of it is not a burden. It is my purpose. It is the practice of everything I believe." In a morning routine, this practice is simple in form but demanding in application. Before you begin your day, call to mind the most likely difficulties you will face. Not to dread them. To address them with the intention you have already established. And with each one, deliberately practice the reframe: this is not happening to me. This is happening for me. This is where the work gets done. This is where the character gets built. This is not an unfortunate interruption to a life that should be comfortable. This is the actual content of a life that is being lived with full engagement. Epictetus, who had more right than almost anyone to view his circumstances as an enemy, never did. He met the worst conditions a human being can face: slavery, physical disability, exile, with an equanimity that his students found almost incomprehensible. When asked how he maintained it, his answer was always the same in its essence. He had simply never made an agreement with himself that things should be easy. He had never decided that comfort was his due. And so when difficulty came, as it always did, as it always does, it did not arrive as a violation of a contract. It arrived as weather, as the nature of things. And the nature of things, he believed, was not to be resented. It was to be worked with, from the inside, using the only tool available, the quality of your own response. You are going to face something hard today. Possibly several things. The morning discipline of the sixth Stoic rule is to decide, before those things arrive, that your relationship with them will be that of a student, not a victim. A student does not resent the difficult chapter. A student does not wish the exam away. A student knows that the difficulty is where the learning happens, that the easy parts teach nothing and are forgotten by morning, while the challenges, the ones you had to actually struggle with, that required more than you thought you had, those are the ones that stay with you, that build something, that make you genuinely different on the other side. That is what the Stoics were after. Not a life without difficulty. A life where every difficulty made them more. Rule 7. Live each day as if it were already complete. There is a meditation Marcus Aurelius returned to so often in his private journals that it becomes impossible to read them without understanding how central it was to his entire approach to living. He kept writing about death. Not obsessively, not morbidly, but with a steady, philosophical clarity that treated mortality not as a tragedy to be managed but as a fact to be understood, and in being understood, transformed into one of the most powerful tools a person can carry through a day. The Stoics called this memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a threat. Not as a punishment. As a clarifying truth. Because here is what death does. When you really look at it without flinching, it makes certain things obviously important, and other things obviously irrelevant. It strips away the performance, the accumulation, the endless postponement of genuine living in favor of preparation for a life that keeps being deferred. It asks, if this were your last day, would you spend it the way you are planning to spend today? And if the honest answer is no, if the honest answer is that you would spend it very differently, with very different priorities and very different levels of presence, then the question that follows is devastating in its simplicity. Why are you not already living that way? The 7th Stoic morning rule is to live each day as if it were already complete. This is a subtle but important distinction from the popular version, which is usually framed as, live each day as if it were your last. The Stoic version is more precise. Complete, not final in a frantic sense. A complete day is one in which you brought your actual values to bear on your actual life. One in which you did not merely pass through experiences, but were genuinely present within them. One in which you made choices that the person you are trying to be would recognize as their own, rather than the reflexive, distracted, comfort-seeking choices that habit and anxiety tend to produce. Seneca wrote one of his most extraordinary letters about exactly this. He told Lucilius that he was losing something far more precious than money when he allowed days to pass without full engagement. He was losing himself. Each day spent in distraction, in the performance of busyness without genuine purpose, in the management of other people's expectations at the expense of his own values. Each such day was not merely wasted in the productivity sense. It was a day of his actual life, of the only life he had, consumed without having truly lived it. And the accumulation of those days, he said, was what produced, at the end of a life, the bewildered grief of someone who had been very busy but had somehow missed the point. In a morning practice, memento mori functions as an orientation tool. Before your day begins, you ask, what would make this day complete? Not perfect. Not exceptional. Not remarkable by any external measure. Complete, meaning, when it ends, you would be satisfied that you had been present, had acted from your actual values, had given your genuine self to whatever the day required of you. You write it down or hold it clearly in mind. And then you use that clarity to organize your choices throughout the day, not rigidly, not in defiance of the inevitable surprises life produces, but as a North Star. When you feel yourself being pulled into something trivial, something reactive, something that belongs to other people's agendas rather than your own life, the question, would a complete day include this? Returns you to center. This practice also does something quietly profound to the experience of time. Most people experience time as a resource they are managing, something to be allocated, optimized, filled with productivity. The Stoics experienced it very differently. They experienced time as the medium of life itself, either to be managed nor wasted but to be inhabited. To be inside of, fully and genuinely, in a way that makes each moment real rather than merely preparatory for some future moment, when life will supposedly actually begin. The morning of time is one of the great human agonies, the sense that the life you meant to live is somehow always just ahead of you, waiting for the right conditions, the right moment, the right version of yourself. Memento mori dissolves this agony. Not by adding urgency to the schedule, but by shifting the relationship with the present moment from impatient to inhabited. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor who could have told himself, with perfect plausibility, That the real work of his life was the great projects, the wars, the legislation, the philosophy he would produce, the empire he would shape. He could have been present in the grand gestures and absent in the ordinary ones. Instead, what his meditations reveal is a man who is trying, every single day, to be fully present in the actual texture of his actual life, including the frustrating, ordinary, exhausting, undramatic texture of it. The small irritations. The petty conflicts. The daily governance work that was unglamorous and demanding and probably boring in its specifics. He kept reminding himself, this is it. This is the life. Not the one coming after the next campaign or the next achievement. This one. Today. With these people and these problems and this particular, unrepeatable slice of time. The seventh rule is perhaps the most quietly radical of the 10. It does not demand dramatic action. It does not require restructuring your life or your schedule. It requires only that you bring, each morning, a genuine intention to be present in the life you actually have, to treat today as if it were worth your full engagement, not because it is exceptional, but because it is real. Because it is yours. Because it will not come again. And because the accumulation of days fully lived is what a meaningful life is made of, not the accumulation of impressive achievements, not the accumulation of comfort, not the postponement of genuine living until some future when the conditions are finally right. Right now. With what you have. In the life you are actually living. That is the practice. That is the rule. Rule 8. Serve something beyond the edges of yourself. One of the things that strikes modern readers about the Stoics most forcefully, and that distinguishes their philosophy most sharply from the popular individualism that dominates contemporary self-help culture, is how consistently, how insistently, they return to the idea of contribution. Not self-improvement for its own sake. Not discipline as a means to personal optimization. But the development of character as the foundation for genuine service to something larger than oneself. For the Stoics, a person who had disciplined their mind, cultivated their virtue, and achieved genuine inner freedom, and who then used that freedom purely for their own benefit, had missed the entire point. The work of the self was always, ultimately, in service of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." This is one of his most compact expressions of a central Stoic conviction, the profound, inseparable interdependence of the individual and the community. Human beings are not solitary creatures who occasionally choose to connect with others. They are fundamentally social, fundamentally relational, built by nature for cooperation and mutual support in a way that makes genuine isolation not just uncomfortable but contrary to what they actually are. The Stoics called this eukiosis, a kind of natural affinity that begins with the self and extends outward in concentric circles, to family, to community, to humanity as a whole. The well-developed person was one in whom this natural affinity had been cultivated, not suppressed in favor of self-interest. The 8th morning rule is about beginning each day with a deliberate orientation toward contribution. Not as a performance of virtue. Not as a strategy for reputation management. But as the genuine expression of a well-examined and well-formed understanding of what a human life is actually for. The Stoics were not gentle about this. Seneca was particularly direct. He argued that the person who lives only for themselves is not really living at all. They are merely consuming their own time, their own comfort, their own possibilities, without producing anything that genuinely matters. The life that matters, he believed, is one that leaves something behind. Something given. Something contributed. Something that would not have existed in the world but for the specific effort of this specific person. In a morning practice, this shows up as intention setting of a specific kind. Before you plan your day around your own needs and goals, your productivity, your advancement, your projects, you take a moment to ask, who do I serve today? Not in the servile sense. Not in the sense of erasing your own needs in favor of everyone else's. But in the genuine sense of recognizing that embedded in today's ordinary interactions, the conversation with a colleague, the meal prepared for a family, the email answered thoughtfully, the small decision made with the care for how it affects others, there is an opportunity to give something real. And identifying those opportunities before the day begins, approaching them with intention rather than habit, is what makes the difference between contribution and mere transaction. Epictetus taught his students that the truest test of philosophical progress was not how well they could articulate philosophical principles, but how their presence affected the people around them. He asked, "Are you gentler with your family? More patient with your colleagues? More generous in your interpretations of others' motives? More honest in your dealings?" If the philosophy you were studying was not producing those outcomes, not abstract virtue but actual, concrete, visible improvement in how you treated the people in your daily life, then the philosophy was decorative and not real. It had not actually taken root. The morning practice of orienting towards service was the mechanism for making it real. For taking the insights of the previous night's reflection or the morning's reading and directing them outward, into the actual lives of the actual people who would share your day. There is something else the Stoics understood about this that is worth sitting with. They knew that the person most consumed by self-focus is, paradoxically, the person most prone to misery. The endless preoccupation with one's own status, one's own feelings, one's own progress, one's own image, this kind of inwardness does not produce well-being. It produces a heightened sensitivity to every threat, every slight, every sign of inadequacy, that makes life feel like an increasingly precarious and exhausting performance. The antidote is not suppression of self-awareness. The Stoics were among history's most rigorous practitioners of self-examination. The antidote is direction. Self-examination turned outward. Energy redirected from self-management into genuine engagement with the needs and realities of others. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme throughout his meditations with what sounds, from an emperor, like almost startling humility. He wrote about his obligations, not his rights, not his privileges, not his greatness, his obligations. To the people of Rome. To the soldiers he sent into danger. To the governors he appointed and the administrators he oversaw. To the truth, in every judgment he made. His morning practice was shot through with this orientation: how do I serve well today? Not how do I consolidate power, how do I protect my legacy, how do I ensure my reputation? How do I serve well? That question, from a man who had more power than almost any individual in history, is one of the most instructive things a person can sit with in a quiet morning moment. The eighth rule will not make you popular in a culture that celebrates self-optimization above all else. It will not trend on social media. It will not generate the kind of approval that comes from displaying your discipline and your achievement. But it will produce something quieter and more durable. A sense of meaning that does not depend on circumstances, a form of satisfaction that is not contingent on everything going your way, a connection to the people in your life that is real rather than strategic. The Stoics believed this was the foundation of genuine happiness. Not pleasure, they were clear on the distinction. Not comfort. But the deep, stable satisfaction of a person who has given something real of themselves to the world and knows, honestly and without self-deception, that they have been useful. That is the goal. That is the rule. Wake up. Ask who you serve today, and then go serve them well. Rule 9. Speak last and listen longest. The Stoics, almost without exception, were suspicious of the person who speaks first and most. Not because speech is unimportant. Seneca was one of the greatest writers of the ancient world. Marcus Aurelius kept detailed written journals. Epictetus was famous for the power of his teaching, but because they observed, with clear eyes and long experience, that the person who speaks first and most is usually the person who is thinking least. And a person who is thinking least is a person who is acting from habit, ego, and reaction rather than from reason and genuine consideration. And in a philosophy that placed reason and genuine consideration at the very center of a well-lived life, the compulsive talker was, almost by definition, a person who had not yet done the most important work. Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This sounds like a piece of folk wisdom, the kind of thing embroidered on a throw pillow. It is actually a philosophical position with significant implications. Listening, real listening, the kind that requires the temporary suspension of your own agenda, your own interpretation, your own eagerness to respond, is one of the most demanding cognitive and emotional disciplines a person can practice. It requires the suppression of ego in the moment. It requires genuine curiosity about another person's reality rather than mere tolerance of the time between your own statements. It requires the acceptance that you might be wrong, that you might not already know what the other person is going to say, that the information arriving in real time is worth more than the interpretation you have already prepared. Most people, in most conversations, are not listening. They are waiting. They are managing the impression they make, managing the direction of the conversation, managing the gap between what the other person is saying and the response they have already decided to give. This is not conversation. It is parallel monologue dressed as exchange. And it produces, reliably, interactions that feel vaguely unsatisfying to everyone involved, because no one was truly present for anyone else, because the exchange produced the performance of connection without its actual substance. The 9th Stoic morning rule is about preparing, before the day begins, to listen more than you speak. To approach every significant interaction of the day with genuine curiosity about the reality of the person you are meeting, rather than with the agenda of moving them toward your own preferred outcome. This sounds simple. In practice, it requires the kind of ego management that the morning discipline makes possible, because it requires walking into situations where you may know a great deal, where you may have authority or expertise or a strong opinion, and choosing, deliberately, to subordinate all of that to the possibility that you might learn something you did not know. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in terms of justice. He believed that listening well, genuinely, without agenda, without early judgment, was a form of justice. A way of giving to each person their actual due, the serious consideration of what they had to say, offered not as a performance of openness but as a real intellectual and emotional engagement. He practiced this in his governance, bringing it to the hearings and petitions that were part of his daily work. Not always successfully, he was honest about his failures in this regard, but with the consistent intention of listening as a deliberate act rather than a passive one. Seneca framed this slightly differently. He wrote about the difference between a conversation that informs you and one that merely confirms what you already believed. He argued that most people, if they are honest, seek the latter. They choose interlocutors who will agree with them, read sources that will validate them, engage with ideas that will reinforce their existing understanding. And in doing this, they cut themselves off from the only thing that can actually grow them, genuine encounter with a perspective that differs from their own, presented by a person whose reality does not match theirs and who therefore knows something they do not. The practice of listening well, of setting aside your agenda long enough to actually receive what another person is offering, is the practice of staying open to reality rather than insisting on your own version of it. In the morning, this practice begins with a simple intention: I will speak from consideration, not from habit. When someone says something to me today, I will hear it before I respond to it. I will ask more questions than I make statements. I will treat curiosity as a discipline, not a sentiment. I will resist the impulse to fill silence with my own voice, and I will resist equally the impulse to prepare my response while someone else is still speaking. These are commitments made in the quiet of the morning, before the conversations begin, when the mind is still settled enough to make genuine commitments rather than vague wishes. There is a practical benefit to this that goes beyond character development, though the Stoics would not have led with it. People who listen well are trusted more, liked more, understood more accurately, and more likely to be given access to information and relationship that changes their lives. Not because they are performing listening as a social strategy, but because genuine listening is so rare and so valuable that when someone encounters it, they respond to it with openness and honesty that transforms the quality of every interaction. The Stoic who spoke from reason rather than impulse, who asked before they asserted, who waited until they understood before they responded, that person was not just more virtuous. They were more effective, more trusted, more genuinely connected to the people around them. The 9th rule is to speak last and listen longest. Bring this intention to your morning. Let it shape every significant conversation of your day. Not as a strategy. As a practice of justice, giving each person you meet the genuine consideration that a rational, conscious, fully present human being deserves from another. It will change the quality of your relationships in ways you cannot fully anticipate. And it will reveal to you, over time, how much of what you thought you already knew was simply a mirror of your own assumptions, and how much reality was quietly waiting on the other side of the silence you were never quite willing to hold. Rule 10. End each day with an honest reckoning. Every morning is shaped by the night before. Not by what happened in your sleep, but by how you ended the previous day, what you took from it, what you learned, what you honestly acknowledged about the choices you made and the person you were during it. The Stoics understood this sequence clearly. The discipline of the morning is only as powerful as the honesty of the evening. A morning practice built on clear intention requires an evening practice built on clear examination. Without the reckoning, the intention floats free of accountability. You can intend magnificently every morning and avoid, every evening, the honest look at whether you actually followed through. This is the 10th rule, and it closes the loop. It is what transforms the other 9 from aspirational thinking into actual character development. Seneca described the evening examination practice with remarkable specificity. He wrote that before sleeping each night, he ran through the entire day, not in a spirit of guilt or self-flagellation, but in the spirit of a judge who takes the work seriously enough to review it honestly. He asked 3 questions, each one simple and pointed. What did I do wrong today? What did I do right? How could I have done better? 3 questions. The first requires honesty about failure, not excuse-making, not rationalization, not the comfortable narrative that turns every mistake into something that was really someone else's fault, or really not that significant. Just honest acknowledgement. Here is where I fell short of who I intend to be. The second question is equally important, and often gets less attention than the first. What did I do right? This is not self-congratulation. It is the honest recognition that character is not built only by cataloging failures, it is also built by recognizing genuine progress, genuine moments when you held a value under pressure, when you chose the harder right over the easier wrong, when you were the person you were trying to be even when it cost something. Recognizing these moments is not vanity. It is data. It tells you what works, where the practice is taking root, which disciplines are beginning to become part of who you actually are rather than just who you are trying to be. The third question, how could I have done better, is the bridge. It is the place where the honest assessment of today becomes the clear intention for tomorrow. Not a list of improvements so long and comprehensive that it produces overwhelm. 1 thing. Maybe 2. The most important place where a different choice would have made a genuine difference. Hold that in mind. Write it down. Let it become the specific intention that tomorrow's morning builds on. This is how the practice compounds, each day of honest reckoning producing a slightly more refined morning intention, which produces a slightly more deliberate day, which produces a slightly richer and more honest evening examination. Day by day, iteration by iteration, the gap between the person you intend to be and the person you actually are begins to close. Marcus Aurelius's meditations are, in their entirety, the product of this practice. They are his evening reckonings, private, unguarded, sometimes harsh, sometimes tender, always honest. They are the writings of a man who took the examined life seriously enough to examine it every day, in writing, without an audience, without performance. The recurring themes, the frustration with his own impatience, the difficulty of dealing with certain people, the ongoing struggle to maintain equanimity under the extreme pressures of his position, these are not the admissions of a failed Stoic. They are the authentic record of a real person practicing an incredibly demanding discipline imperfectly and continuously. The imperfection is the practice. The continuity is the achievement. What the evening reckoning does, beyond its direct function of reviewing the day, is build something deeper, the habit of self-knowledge. And self-knowledge, not the comfortable, curated version where you know your strengths and have made peace with your limitations, but real, unflattered, ongoing self-knowledge, is the foundation of everything the Stoics were trying to build. You cannot correct what you will not examine. You cannot improve what you refuse to see clearly. You cannot become more intentional if you never honestly assess the gap between your intentions and your actions. The evening practice is where the honesty happens. And honesty, in the Stoic understanding, is not just one virtue among many. It is the soil in which every other virtue grows. Epictetus would begin each day's teaching by asking his students, "What did you work on yesterday? What did you make progress on? What did you fail at?" He was not being harsh. He was being serious. He was treating philosophy as what it actually is for the Stoics, not an academic subject to be studied but a life practice to be pursued, evaluated, and refined on a daily basis. The questions were accountability. They were care. They communicated, "This matters enough to be checked. Your progress is real enough to be measured. The work you are doing on yourself is worthy of the same honest attention you would give any serious project in your life." The 10th rule brings everything full circle. Wake before the world decides who you are, and end each day by honestly deciding whether you were that person. Rehearse the worst before it arrives, and end each day by examining how you handled what actually arrived. Draw the line between what is yours and what is not, and end each day by looking honestly at the places where you crossed that line in frustration, anxiety, or ego. Guard the gate of your attention, and end each day by noting what got through that should not have, and what you successfully kept out. Act once, without hesitation, and end each day by facing the things you deferred, not to punish yourself but to build the honest awareness that makes tomorrow's action more decisive. Welcome difficulty as the only real teacher, and end each day by identifying what today's difficulty actually taught you. Live each day as if it were already complete, and end each day by asking whether it was. Serve something beyond yourself, and end each day by asking whether you gave something genuine. Speak last and listen longest, and end each day by recalling the conversations where you did, and the ones where you didn't. 10 rules. 10 practices. Not a checklist to be performed and ticked off. A living, daily, cumulative discipline of becoming. Of closing the distance, morning by morning and evening by evening, between the person you are and the person you know yourself capable of being. Closing, the daily practice that changes everything. Here is what you need to understand about everything you just heard. None of it is complicated. Not a single one of these 10 rules requires special equipment, a particular lifestyle, an unusual amount of money, a particular level of education, or favorable circumstances. They require only one thing: the daily decision to take your own inner life seriously. To treat the quality of your mind with the same deliberate attention you give to the maintenance of your body, the management of your career, the cultivation of your relationships. To wake each morning with the understanding that who you are is not fixed, it is a work in progress, shaped by choices, and that the choices made in the first and last hours of each day have an outsized influence on who that work is progressing toward. The Stoics did not have an easy time with this. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire in crisis, and struggled every morning to access the philosophical clarity he knew he needed. Epictetus was a slave who rebuilt a philosophy of freedom from a position of complete external powerlessness. Seneca was a wealthy man who spent decades wrestling with the gap between what he taught and how he actually lived. These were not paragons of effortless virtue. They were people in difficult circumstances, trying hard, failing sometimes, examining honestly, and beginning again the next morning. What made them extraordinary was not that they succeeded perfectly. It was that they never stopped trying. That the practice was never abandoned because it was difficult. That each imperfect day was followed by an honest reckoning and an unbroken intention to do better with the next one. That is available to you. Not the perfection. The practice. The morning that is claimed before the world gets its hands on it. The honest look at what could be lost. The clear line between what is yours and what is not. The deliberate guarding of the gate of your attention. The closing of the gap between intention and action. The welcome extended to difficulty. The full presence in a day treated as complete in itself. The genuine orientation towards service. The listening that comes before the speaking. And the honest reckoning before sleep that makes the next morning's intention more real. These 10 practices, taken together, are not a productivity system. They are not a life hack. They are a philosophy, one tested under conditions of real and unimaginable pressure by real and remarkable people, and found to hold. They do not guarantee an easy life. They guarantee something better, a meaningful one. A life in which, whatever happens, you are genuinely present, genuinely intentional, and genuinely becoming the person you have the capacity to be. If this has spoken to something in you today, if some part of what you've heard landed differently than you expected, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. Right now, before you close this video, before you move to the next thing, before the moment passes. Hit subscribe. Join the community of people who are taking this work seriously, who are coming back week after week to go deeper, to be challenged, to build something real in themselves. There are thousands of us, and every single one of us started exactly where you are now. One video. One decision to take it seriously. Subscribe to this channel, and let this be the day that changes the direction. The morning starts now. The practice starts now. Not tomorrow, when conditions are better. Now, with what you have, in the life you actually have. That is the Stoic rule. That is the only rule that matters. Begin. Subscribe to this channel for more life-changing Stoic wisdom, delivered weekly, built for real people, designed to produce real results. Every video is a discipline. Every discipline is a step. Hit subscribe and take the step.